it's Wednesday, May 25th, 2016. I'm going to be covering Japan today. There's always a lot going on in terms of news about the Japanese economy, the Bank of Japan, all the debt they have, the lost decade. It's more like the lost 2.5 decades now. First of all, a little bit of background on Japan. Like Germany, Japan lost World War II. Their economies were completely destroyed. And like Germany, there was an economic miracle, basically economic miracle in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And Japan, and at the time West Germany, became export powerhouses. And I would argue that one of the reasons that happened, because everything was cleaned out, they started from nothing. So the only way was up, while countries like the UK, France, and that won the war, their infrastructure was still there. So so they didn't have an economic miracle. Anyway, going back to why we are where we are in Japan today, I think we need to go back to 1985 and the Plaza Accord. Basically, the Plaza Accord was a meeting of the major finance ministers and governments of France, West Germany, Japan, United States, and the United Kingdom. And they met at the Plaza Hotel in New York, and they decided as official policy to devalue the dollar because the dollar was too strong. The trade deficit was growing, and so they decided to depreciate the dollar, and that led to a strong rise in the yen, and it didn't really help the U.S. trade balance with Japan, because basically Japan still made better products, and even though they were more expensive, Americans still bought them. And but what it led to, the Plaza Accord, was it allowed the Bank of Japan, as the yen got stronger, it allowed them to have a very loose monetary policy, from 1985 onwards, and that led to a huge asset bubble in Japan, in real estate, in the stock market. And at one point, at one point, all the land in the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, that land there was valued more than all the real estate in California. That's how crazy things got in Japan. The Nikkei, and I'll put a link to this chart if you want to have a look at it. The Nikkei in the beginning of the 80s was below 10,000. And then you can see here, once they got the Plaza Accord, the Nikkei just went straight up from below 10,000. It looks like it was around 8,000. I'm not sure exactly, but it went up to a high of 38,915 in December of 1989. And so it's a crazy move. And then it dropped all the way down to below 20,000 in the early 90s. And since then, it's, recently went up, back up of, to 20,000. But it's back below there. It's around 16,000. So, yeah, the high was almost 40,000 in the Nikkei 225 index. And what happened in the early 90s is that the Japanese officials, government, central banks, when this bubble burst in Japan in the basically 1990, 1989 was the top in December. The Japanese banks should have failed, collapsed, but everything was saved. And I remember, as I said in the earlier video, I was working in the city in London back then, and all the stories were how Japan was saving their banks, and they're becoming zombie banks. So the Japanese government and the Ministry of Finance, the Bank of Japan, they never allowed these bad debts to clear. They didn't want to admit that it failed. And so they kept trying to save the system, and they did. They kept these banks alive, and they've kept them alive. Maybe they have different names now, but they were merged and, whatever. And the flip side of that was that the Japanese government had to take on debt to back all these bailouts. And they never, and even back then, the West, I remember the mainstream media, financial mainstream media back in the mid-90s, late 90s, they all said Japan is doing the wrong thing. They should let things, correct and let the market take care of it. And they're saying that about Japan, and we've done the same thing in the West. When they should allow, Goldman Sachs, all the American investment banks to collapse, they saved it. They saved the bailout. They let a few collapse, like Lehman Brothers and Northern Rock here in the UK, but they bailed everyone else out. So we've got zombie banks here. So in Japan, it's almost 26 years now since, the bubble burst in Japan. Real estate has never gone back to the levels that it was back then. And also by not letting the free market, clear the bubble, the Japanese leaders, they've basically subjected the Japanese people to one generation of economic malaise. And the other problem they have now is that the Japanese population is getting older and older, and the Japanese population is also starting to go down. So their demographics is not helping. Back 26 years ago, Japan still had a lot of firepower, but now, they're running out of rope. So I'm not sure, what's going to happen. And I'm not sure because a lot of people in the West, in finance, economics, in the media, they think that we're going to be able in the West to do a Japan, just keep going, very slow growth and, very low interest rates. The Japanese rates, they've been low for decades now. I remember, trading Japanese government bond futures, and the yield for those had a one handle already 10 years ago, and it's now I think it might be less than one. I'm not sure, but that would be wishful thinking, I think, for the Western non-Japanese system. The U.S., UK, Germany. They wish, rates stay low as they are, and that's why most people don't think the bond bubble can burst here, because it hasn't burst in Japan. But don't forget, Japan, they have a huge amount of domestic savings, so they were able to tap into that. But the West doesn't have that much savings. So yeah, that, in my opinion, is why Japan is where it is today. Is basically because of government interference. It started in 1985, when these governments of the major countries in the West met to manipulate the foreign exchange rates to help American trade deficit narrow. And it hasn't. The American trade deficit has gotten worse, in the last 30 years. So it didn't help. All it did is create a huge bubble in Japanese real estate, financial assets, and the Japanese are paying for that bubble until today. They could have let it collapse and, not saved it, and Japan would probably be doing really well today, but they didn't. It's a bit like there's a depression in 1920 or 1921 in the States, And no one talks about that depression because they let it happen. They didn't bail anyone out. And then 12 months later, the U.S. economy picked up. So, yeah, so, we're doing the same thing in the West. What's the consequence of, our bailouts here going to be? And Japan, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen there. They've been able to keep going for the last 26 years, but it's not getting better. I think the best thing that could happen for Japan is that the system would implode and they could start from scratch. I mean, they had a lot worse off back in 1945. It wasn't just financial destruction, it was physical destruction and human, lives. So why not let this financial system just like implode and start again? I don't think Japan would have a problem in restarting. It would, if anything, be better. It's like, fires that destroy forests are sometimes good, because then, the forest comes back even stronger. It's the same thing with economies, but unfortunately, the politicians and the central bankers always seem to think they can do things better and, not let things do what they should. So yeah, that's what's up with Japan. They've they haven't let the system clear for 26 years. Hopefully, before this happens in the West, hopefully it doesn't go as long as it has in Japan. The only way for that not to happen in the West would be like an implosion, collapse, which sounds bad, but it would be a blessing in disguise, in my opinion. So if you enjoyed this video and you enjoy, what I talk about, and you haven't subscribed yet, please do. If you've liked it, please give me a thumbs up and also share it with friends if you enjoyed this video. Thank you. Take care. Bye.